Well, welcome everybody to the 10th episode of Food System Fridays. This webinar series is organized by the Sustainable Food Systems faculty at Prescott College. My name is Currey and I am the director of the Master of Science in Sustainable Food Systems program, which is an intentionally online program that seeks to support students in their efforts to build more sustainable food systems in their own communities. Our students apply what they are learning in the online classroom to improve their food systems. We started this webinar series because we know that there are families all over the country encountering situations where they cannot find the kinds of food that they are used to in the amounts that they are used to. The spotlight is on sustainable supply chains, and clearly many of our existing food systems are not equitably ensuring food for all, even in the best of times. For those of you who are less familiar, a food system encompasses all of the stages of keeping us nourished. It's easy to feed someone. It's not as easy to nourish someone. So growing, harvesting, packing, processing, transforming, marketing, consuming, and hopefully not very much disposal of food. But these are the main components of a food system. We're avid advocates for sustainable diets. And sustainable diets are diets with low environmental impacts that can play an important role in ensuring food and nutrition security. As a faculty, we are thinking about the increased vulnerability to food insecurity that has happened as a result of the isolation measures associated with COVID-19. This shows us more now than ever that we have important work to do to ensure safe, resilient food systems. But the big question is, how do we get this right? The Food System Fridays series focuses on policies, practices, and people such as our panelists who you see here, who can help show us and help us learn about models of sustainable food systems and sustainable communities. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to let you know that we'll be airing at the same time in 2 weeks to continue the Sustainable Food Systems Fridays series. So please join us again on June 19th. When you registered for this webinar, it means that you will get an email automatically next time letting you know about the topic and the time. A couple little Zoom moments. We're now pros on Zoom, 3 months into the COVID crisis, in most places with restrictions beginning in March. But this may be the first time that you've participated in a Zoom webinar, which is a little bit different. First of all, just so you know that the webinar is being recorded and the contents of the chat, which we'll talk about in just a moment, are also being captured. We make this webinar freely available through our website and on YouTube so that folks who couldn't make it at this exact time have access to the great information that our panelists are going to be sharing with you. And so know that we'll be distributing this broadly. Technical moments. One, you're muted, so feel comfortable with your being muted. We will not unmute you without your permission. Your camera is also muted, so feel comfortable that your camera is muted, and we will not unmute you without your permission. But we would like you to please interact with one another and also with the panelists. And the way that you can do that is through the chat function. So if you hover your mouse down, most of you, it'll be at the bottom of your screen, and there's like that little cartoon, bubble, and it says chat. So go ahead and click on that, and you'll see a little to line there. I would encourage you all to toggle that to be all panelists and attendees. And so that means that anything that you write here, the panelists will see, and also everybody else who has joined us today for the webinar can see also. So I would encourage you all to please introduce yourselves and the organization that you are affiliated with so that we know who you are and we can tailor this webinar to our audience also. Please feel free to ask questions for the panelists. I will be monitoring the chat through the duration and make sure that we direct the questions to the panelists. And the panelists will also be answering your questions as the webinar goes. And if you have joined us and you have an answer or a resource that you'd like to share, please do. We consider you part of our learned community also, so please pop in there. And nobody has introduced themselves yet. Yes, thank you, Rosa. So I would appreciate it if you could all introduce yourselves. So now is the time to get to the good stuff, why we all joined here, now that we know the tools of how to communicate with one another on the webinar. But really, you know, the focus of the webinar series has been on trying to understand, you know, what programs, what relationships, what policies, you know, what enabling environments were in place before COVID hit that was helping some communities weather the restrictions better than other communities. But then also the crisis has shown us that there are gaps in our food systems and has really magnified what some of those gaps are. So, you know, we're focused on a little bit of a longer term perspective here on, you know, how do we get this right, to how do we address food insecurity and food system sustainability in the long term. And so, you know, we think that school garden programs and community garden programs are critical and they're essential for that long-term food system sustainability, because we know school gardens are how kids are being connected with real food. We're months into the crisis, and the organizations like those who have, whose representatives have joined us today, the organizations that support school and community gardens are responding to community needs differently in different parts of the country. So most have had phased approaches, so developing online curriculum activities, letting the adults into the gardens to get them planted up, building coalitions to address community food security, sort of what to do if they haven't been permitted to access the gardening spaces, and figuring out really creative ways on how to keep kids engaged in outdoor learning, even though there are the isolation restrictions. So, you know, plants are in the ground, even with all of this going on at many schools and community gardens, and kids are mostly out of school, so it's time to hunker down and think about what's next, and hopefully be able to share what some of these innovations have been from across the country. So I have a wonderful group of folks sharing their time with all of you today. So we have 5 panelists, and one of whom you may recognize from a previous episode of Food System Fridays on school gardens. That's Christine Gall. But now we're into our next phase. So I want to introduce Laura Thompson, and she is the Assistant Director of Strategic Alliances for Big Green. And she's joined by 2 of her colleagues, Marie Dennan and Josh McGuire. Marie Dennan is the Program Manager for Big Green in Memphis, and Josh McGuire is in charge of programs for Big Green in Colorado, but also in Los Angeles. So Laura will begin by sharing with us a bit more information about the important role of school gardens for the health and wellness of our children, but also about the work of Big Green. We're visiting Memphis with Marie Dennan and Colorado with Josh McGuire. So we'll get kind of a report in from the ground, what's happening there. And then we're off to Vermont with Christine Gall. She's the Garden Education Coordinator for the Burlington School Food Project, and she's also affiliated with kidsgardening.org. And we're so pleased to be joined by Lyndsey Waugh. She's the Executive Director of Sprouts Healthy Communities Foundation. And we're hoping to understand, you know, because it takes all of these different pieces, the schools, the school districts, but also the generosity of donors to understand, you know, and implement what's next. So we'll learn from each panelist what their organization's programs do, where they're working, and we've asked them to discuss the adaptations that they've made due to the COVID pandemic to ensure that their organization's missions continue. And we also asked for suggestions from their perspectives about how we continue to move forward, because we, you know, are working in one of the most important sectors globally, and this is about food and keeping people nourished. And so we have to get it right, and this is our new reality. So Laura, I hand the mic over to you, please.
Great, thank you, Robin. Well, hello everyone, good afternoon. I'd like to begin with talking a little bit about the importance of school and community gardens to start off with, and I'm going to focus on school gardens. So school gardens really provide students the opportunity to engage in environmental stewardship and learn how to become responsible caretakers of the world around them. Gardens can provide students a great exposure to the outdoors and a real-time look at how food is grown. In addition, school gardens help increase students' academic achievement. They provide an experiential hands-on learning environment where classroom learning is connected to the garden and vice versa. Not only in STEM subjects, but also in areas like ELA and social emotional learning, which is so important for students. Finally, last but not least, school gardens can really help to build a healthy lifestyle for students by growing their emotional connection to food through repeated exposure. And this can really help influence behavior change around food preference. So I'd like to now jump into a little bit of what we do at Big Green and how this relates to school gardens. So Big Green was founded in 2011 by Kimball Musk and Hugo Matheson. Kimball and Hugo co-founded the Kitchen Restaurant Group in 2004, and they were supporting local garden initiatives through their restaurants. They really wanted to find a way to achieve that kind of local impact at scale. So they founded Big Green, our nonprofit, which was formerly known as the Kitchen Community, in order to create a scalable school garden that could be replicated. We at Big Green have 620 learning gardens in 7 regions across the country, and we focus on underserved urban areas. 72% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. Those regions are Colorado, Chicago, Memphis, LA, Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, and Detroit. And as Robin mentioned, 2 of my colleagues are here today that are going to be speaking a bit more about the work in their regions. We work with schools in these regions to implement our standard programming model in order to connect learning to the built environment of the garden. But we've really had to pivot because of COVID-19, and we've pivoted from more of an in-person programming model to going completely virtual through our site, biggreenathome.org. Through our rapid response effort, we've provided families, teachers, and schools with at-home resources, remote trainings, and curriculum to keep kids learning and engaging with real food. And through working with educators and students has been an area of focus for Big Green for a long time now, but engaging families and caregivers is a new audience for us, and we've been really excited to be able to bring our programming to these populations. In the next phase of our response effort, we're focusing on food security and coordinating with other impactful community organizations around produce and seed distribution efforts, as well as providing resources and tools for families to learn to grow their own food at home. So really thinking about resiliency. And now that we've been able to gain permission to go back into some of our learning gardens, we are transitioning these spaces to high production giving gardens in order to really contribute to efforts to provide fresh, real food to our communities. And as Josh and Marie will talk about, we didn't have permission to go into our gardens through the first phase of the pandemic, due to certain restrictions on school grounds. So this is something where it's really the next phase for us. And my colleague Josh and Marie are going to talk more specifically about what this is looking like on the ground in their regions. So I would love to turn it over to Marie.
Great, I wasn't sure if I was first. Hello everybody, again, I'm Marie Dennan. I am here in Memphis. There's a storm brewing outside, so I apologize if you hear thunder or if my internet cuts out. That is what happened. So in Memphis, we currently are working with 134 school gardens, mostly in one large public school district. And then some of those schools are charters within that school district as well. So we have covered a lot of ground in the last 5 years that we've worked in Memphis. And when school shut down here the third week of May, we did actually distribute some seeds and seedlings to teachers very quickly. We did it in a safe way, but very quickly, because they expressed interest in wanting to get their gardens planted very quickly, or to take the seedlings home with them. Shortly after we did that, we decided as a company and regionally to just stop all of that completely, just to make sure that everybody was safe, and that we weren't in any way expecting or putting any burden on teachers with an expectation of them thinking that we thought that they, would still want to work in their gardens. So we took a pause, and since then, like Laura mentioned, our team has been very active in creating a lot of original content for our Big Green at Home website. So as of this week, we have gotten back into our gardens. We got permission from the district. We have also found out that about 43 of our schools have been active during this entire time. There are 43 schools and 43 or more teachers who have continued to go to their school gardens. They received permission from their principals and continue to grow food this spring, or just check on the garden at this time. Quite a few teachers told us that being able to go to their garden was a really positive emotional experience for them during this time, because that was the only place that they were going out in public. And now that we're back in the gardens, we're able to continue to support those 43 schools. We're going to be providing them with summer seeds and seedlings. We will be able to work with those teachers in the gardens if necessary. We are requiring that all of our team wear masks and gloves and practice social distancing. And we are also going to be, requiring that the teachers follow that along with us in the gardens. So we're super excited about that work. And then at about 34 of our gardens, we are going to be managing ourselves. So I have a team of 5 program coordinators in Memphis, and I have 2 part-time program assistants. And we will be taking over the management of 34 school gardens, doing higher production in those gardens, and starting to identify community partners that can help us distribute the food to people in those communities where it will make the biggest impact. So this has actually been an interesting, we've been wanting to deepen our impact in communities and build more sustainable relationships over time anyways. And this actually is giving us an opportunity to really focus on that more, which I think will be really great and will make Big Green the work that we do even more important in the city. And so we're starting to work in those gardens right now. We're planting things like tomatoes, cucumber, watermelon, squash. All of our gardens will be getting flowers, herbs, and cover crops as well. So in the rest of the schools, that's 55 schools that the teacher is not interested or is not able to take care of the garden, or we have identified that as a school that is not easy for us to access. We will be doing work in those gardens over the summer and planting cover crop, planting flowers, making sure that we still are providing the support to maintain the soil health in those gardens and to beautify the campus, and also to attract pollinators to the gardens. And so it's really important for us to not forget about those schools because the school district still is not sure what's going to happen in the fall. There are talks of students coming back, but in a staggered days, lots of options are on the table. But as of now, I think teachers are expecting that there will be classes in some capacity and that they would still love to be able to utilize the gardens and teach with the gardens. So our programming has expanded in supporting communities outside of the school building through our Big Green at Home resources. And we have been able to put together a lot of grow kits. They're essentially grow bags that we're putting a high quality potting mix in and we're putting a tomato seedling or a pepper or herbs. And so these are kits that anybody can take home. They don't have to worry about like starting their own garden if that's not possible, if they don't have the space, or they're worried about the soil contamination. So it's an opportunity for families to grow food, to engage with growing their own food if they never have before. And we're finding that lots of teachers are actually excited about starting to grow food at home because they also have families at home. And so the experience that they might get in a school garden, they're actually now doing at their home. And we are distributing these kits through our office parking lot. Our office is located in a very convenient location in the city. And so we have been setting up a safe curbside pickup for people to come pick up from our office. We also, just this week, are starting to partner with the coordinated school health department at our major school district here. They are starting to host some health fairs and giveaways at schools. For example, they're going to be giving jump ropes away, or they're trying to think about putting together different kinds of like healthy kits. They're coming up with lots of different ways to support their schools. And so they've asked us if we would like to also set up a table alongside them. And this is a great place for us to distribute the grow kits to the broader community. And then one other way that we've been distributing resources to the community is in partnership with organizations that are still engaging with lots of people. So there's a composting company that is an essential service. So they never stop service. They have a weekly route of residents that they pick up their compost from every week. So we were able to put together little seed bundles for them to give to all of their clients, and they have about 450 clients. So there's a lot of people in the city now that can engage with Big Green's work or to grow food at home if they want. And then we also have been putting together little bundles of seeds to distribute to 2 healthcare organizations that work with people that are not able to access healthcare from their company, or they can't afford to purchase healthcare on their own. And so these companies are still seeing patients. Some of them are actually doing COVID testing. And anyone that comes to their clinics or gets tested can receive a food box from the food bank. So they have included the seeds in with some of those boxes in case people want to take them home. So yeah, that's what's happening in Memphis. Focusing on the donation, growing food for donation is definitely something that we had been wanting to start. We had been starting to think about over the last year. Just our programming is so much focused around education and working with teachers, and that is really important. But there are times when teachers themselves are not able to harvest food from the garden because of testing or because of other things going on in the school setting. And then the reality is there's produce that doesn't always have a home. And so we've been wanting to engage more in connecting that food to be able to make the best impact in those communities. And so we are just ramping that work up, and really excited that we have this space to figure some of that out right now.
Josh, we'd love to hear about what's going on in your neck of the woods.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Josh McGuire, and I'm the program manager for our Colorado region and our LA region, which is a unique position to be in right now, because in Colorado, we have just gained access to our learning gardens. And in LA, we do not have that ability. We can't go on those grounds. And in Los Angeles as well, our gardens are behind locked gates most of the time. Most of the schools are behind locked gates, I should say. We as an organization really do not put our gardens behind locked gates. So it is the entirety of the school that's blocked off in LA, and we can't even get access to the grounds. So we have taken an innovative approach there that I will touch on after I talk a little bit more about what we're doing here in Colorado. So in the past at Big Green, as Marie said and Laura touched on, we're very focused on education. We're very focused on teacher trainings, teacher skills, how to get a garden planted with 30 students, staff presentations, side activities, all of those other things. And Homegrown has been this opportunity for us to reach out to the community. But we've also continued our educator resources by building out something called our teacher tool shed. So that's been going out virtually as well. We have a whole curriculum called Ready, Set, Grow that we are doing for teachers, and that is set up as a Google Classroom right now. So aside from those things, which are kind of more national things, in Colorado, we've really been working closely with our districts to ensure that as soon as they had permissions to go back into the gardens, we were in cahoots with that. And we could get right back into the gardens, we could plant, and we could start growing. And so as the time into the summer started ticking, we of course got a little more nervous because, you know, we're getting towards the cutoff point here in our zone in Colorado to be able to plant our summer gardens. So our team of program coordinators has been busily working to get our gardens planted. So we have switched from this mentality of doing all of these trainings, although we're still doing them, to being more in the gardens, more maintaining the gardens, more growing the gardens, and specifically transitioning from gardens that grew a really diverse array of crops into these gardens that are now growing for production. So we're growing for production also for community needs. So what have we heard from the community? That the food banks are actually going to take and be able to utilize, that we can also grow in our region. And so we've specifically focused on those crops to grow as well. So our garden plan has become much simpler, but many more of those plants. And then those plants being plants that those communities are going to use. So that's taking really a different approach than just our access and preference piece that we hold really near and dear as an organization. We're trying to increase access, preference, and knowledge of fruits and vegetables throughout all of our gardens all of the time. But in this COVID response time, now we are focusing namely on food access and growing these gardens for food access. And we're not doing it in a silo. And that's been this bright light that has been shining throughout all of this this pandemic and this darkness is really this ability to now start to work with some partners that we haven't necessarily worked with in the past. We know of them, we work alongside them, but our niches didn't completely align. But now going into this food access piece, as robust as we are, we've been able to align in such a way as to create something that is now a formal coalition here in the Front Range of Colorado. It's called the Grow More Coalition, and it's made up of everything from food distributors to food growers to community action organizations, and as well as people who are preparing that food and food banks, as well as some smaller 1-acre urban community farms. So together we can all start to really grow this food and know that it's going to be distributed in an appropriate manner, and then go to a place where it is going to be used and marketed in a way that everyone knows that this food is coming in. So harvest tracking has been something we're also have always been keen on, but are really doubling down on now. We want to know how much food we're growing. We have goals set with some of our community members in this coalition to grow food. So for example, there's an organization called the Mount Bello Organizing Community, which is a small little neighborhood in Denver. And the goal is to work with them to grow 30,000 pounds of produce that we can donate to the food bank there. So they are helping us as well to water all of these gardens. So we're working, it's not just our staff going out to water these gardens and grow these gardens, although we are providing all the seeds and seedlings for all of them and the growing plans and going out and planting them all. Usually we're trying to do this in conjunction safely with our community members. And I'm going to touch on safety as well a bit more here as soon as I'm done explaining what exactly we're doing. And getting into the gardens with our community members, with our teachers, with administrators, and with fellow coalition partners has allowed us to grow more gardens than we would have been able to previously get to. We have a huge geographic range. It's one of the challenges in Colorado. We have It is a massive geographic range. It can take us, if you were to drive straight through with no traffic, it would take you 1 hour and 45 minutes to go from our southernmost garden to our northernmost garden. So we've got to be very strategic about what we're doing. And of course, we've got to keep our mileage down. Minimum, it has to be an affordable initiative for us as well. So resource-wise, we've got to be strategic. And having all these community members and this resilience that's now built up is allowing us to fill in all of the boxes so that those gardens are getting watered every day. And we can continue to go check on them, water them whenever there is a date that someone can't be there, and ensure that we're also going there to fertilize the gardens, because production-oriented gardens in small spaces are going to need to be fertilized a couple of times a year throughout this growing season. So we want to make sure we're maintaining that and the health of our plants and replacing them if they are not doing very well, and replacing them quickly if possible. But our coalition has also helped to build up these resources. We got all of our seedlings donated because of this coalition, and our work closely with people like the CSU Extension Office and some other really amazing community partners. So I really am thankful for that and this community we've had in Colorado that's come together, because we couldn't be making this impact or pivoting so incredibly quickly without all of that built-in resilience, especially with not only the growing of it, but the distribution of it, and ensuring that it's going to go to a place where it's going to be useful. So that's one of the ways we've been pivoting here in Colorado. We have worked very closely with the district as well to ensure that we're following all the proper safety guidelines. It's very important that we're following federal, state, district, and our own Big Green policy guidelines. We all have safety guidelines. Luckily, they all align, and there's nothing we have to do too much that's extra over here. If anything, our Big Green policy is always going to err towards the most conservative policy for safety that we can find. So that includes wearing gloves in the garden, wearing masks in the garden, socially distancing in the garden if we are meeting with somebody in the garden, as well as bringing soap and washing our hands in the garden. So we have actually come up with one solution that I'll share with everybody for when you meet someone in the garden and they don't have a mask on, because that does happen. There are community members who show up without a mask on. And Big Green policy is that we can't be in the garden if that is the case. And in order to avoid that conflict, we've taken to bringing boxes of disposable masks with us that we can then just give out one of those to a community member and say, can you just wear this for the duration of while we're working together in here? And ensure that then we have a solution in hand. So that's a little bit about the safety and a little bit about Colorado. And I should also note, in Colorado, it's also being in the High Plains desert where we are. If watering does drop off for more than a day or two, our plants can severely suffer, if not be able to recoup at all. So it's incredibly important. Watering is the make or break for so many of our garden locations. So that built-in resilience through the coalition has been incredibly important. And then in regards to LA, we've been able to pivot by really working virtually. So our team out there is putting together virtual workshops that are not only geared towards just our teacher community that we work in, but those virtual workshops are also going to be geared towards that at-home gardening piece and activities that those teachers can be doing at home, with follow-ups for anybody else who would like to follow up. And these are going to be a little more in depth than we usually go at schools, because we can start to talk to, instead of just introductory garden plans, we can start to talk to some more dynamics around seasonality and some more dynamics around different crops that can be growing. And that in LA, although many people think you can just plant something whenever and it's just going to grow, that's not exactly true. And there are a lot of nuances to gardening in a climate like that. So the team out there is actually really excited to be diving deeper than we've previously been able to go. And so we've been pushed to go and be more virtual, and possibly even take these virtual lessons and start to grab onto a larger community audience than we've ever had in the past, because now we're not limited by the geography of going, And traffic in LA is awful. So going from one garden and doing a workshop can be your whole day. It can take up your whole day by the time you get home and you follow up. And so in this way, we might be able to get to, we have 80 schools out in LA, and we might be able to, we could have them all on a webinar if we had that sort of attendance. That's the goal, of course. But
now you're talking my language here, Josh.
Yeah.
As an online program, and as advocates for what that kind of reach can have. I wanted to ask you one question. There were quite a few folks who were really curious about what plants the food banks were requesting of you all when you pivoted to a little more production-oriented focus. So what did you plant?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so happy to answer that. So we have found that they're ubiquitous, really. And what more than what we did plant was what we were asked not to plant. That was even more so important. And it was one of those things that they told us, kale, for example, don't plant so much kale because it just gets left on the shelf. And too much chard gets left on the shelf, and those greens. But if you plant a lot of jalapeno peppers and some sweet peppers and a variety of peppers, tomatoes, basil, herbs, and zucchini, yellow squash, things like that are more likely to be taken from the shelves and are more likely to be utilized in a lot of different ways. So those are really the main crops that we've been growing, as well as snap beans. Is another big one that we've been growing, pole beans for the most part, because we didn't have bush beans on hand. But yeah, so not a super diverse array. Usually we would grow, cucumbers as well, lots of cucumbers too. And things that we can harvest throughout the season. So we're not planting a ton of winter squash right now because we'll get that at the end, but one plant or two plants can take up a whole lot of space in our garden that we could otherwise be harvesting a ton of cherry tomatoes off of, and donating all of that to a food bank, as opposed to taking up that whole space all season long. So thinking about production of each plant has been important as well.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Maybe I have a request as we transition to Christine and listen to what's happening up in Vermont. If I could get you to type that list into the chat, that would be wonderful, because lots of folks were curious, and you may be interested to read. Yeah, thank you. What other folks have been doing. You were talking, so you couldn't be reading, but so I just want to draw your attention there. So thank you, Josh. I know that folks are going to have questions. I think they're just like listening so carefully right now, but I love hearing about the coalition and that pivot more into a production. While you have access to the facilities, you have access, you have the knowledge, and you have, resources are always a challenge, I'm sure. So we won't say you have those sorted, but it was very interesting to listen to the approaches both in Memphis and in Colorado. So Christine, Burlington, what's happening in Vermont?
Sure. So there's a lot happening in Vermont. So yeah, I live in Burlington. And about 2 months ago, I've participated in one of the Food Systems Fridays webinars and talked a bit about how the farm to school focused organizations that I work with, what we're doing and how we're responding. And so I'm kind of here today to provide a bit of a follow-up. So basically, I split my week between two partnered organizations, the first being the Burlington School Food Project, or BSFP for short, and that is the in-house food service department for our city school district. We provide breakfast, lunch, snack, supper to roughly 3,500 students a day, but the department also heads up the farm to school initiatives for the district. And these farm to school programs, they extend well beyond cafeteria-centric, like local procurement efforts. And they extend to the work that I do as the garden education coordinator. So during the school year, I teach cooking and gardening classes. I provide guidance and resources to our elementary school garden committees. I manage our district's greenhouse, where we plant seedlings for all 7 of our school gardens. I also manage 2 larger production-oriented gardens, which total about a ½ acre of growing space. And then over the summer, I help lead a student-run food truck program. And our food truck uses a lot of the produce from our school gardens during the summer. And then come the school year, our harvest typically goes to our cafeterias or straight into classrooms for tasting and cooking activities. In addition to my work with BSFP, I also work for a Burlington-based national level nonprofit called Kids Gardening, which provides resources to youth garden programs across the country. We create and provide garden-based lesson plans and activities, some of which are available for free on our website and others that are published in print curricula. And we also have a pretty robust set of grant programs that folks can apply to for funding and supplies. So really, Kids Gardening is a support organization. And as the education specialist for them, I largely focus on implementing these grant programs, everything from evaluating applications and directly supporting our grantees to project managing garden installations. And so that's kind of like my introduction. And basically, COVID-19 has greatly impacted the work that I do at both organizations. So at Kids Gardening, we are seeing an outpouring of interest in garden-based activities. There are a lot of folks that are looking for ways to engage children in the outdoors and just also looking for general gardening tips. We have many people who are coming to us for just basic gardening resources. And I would say that increased interest in gardening, in growing your own food, is also really apparent at a local level here in Burlington. So in Vermont, there have been a number of statewide initiatives that have popped up aimed at getting folks free seeds and plant starts to better enable individuals to start gardening. And at the Burlington School Food Project, we've supported these efforts by making seed packets available to school district families. So we have feeding sites that were established across the city within a day of schools getting shut down to provide families with meals. And we've been using these sites to occasionally distribute seeds and informational flyers about how to start seeds. And since my position with BSFP, considering they're the food service department, I fall under the category of an essential food service worker. And so I've been able to continue a lot of our spring growing projects unhindered. And when it comes to our actual school gardens, since schools were closed in mid-March, I've been working remotely with a lot of our individual point people affiliated with each elementary school garden to create some sort of unified vision for what we'd like to do with our sites. At first, we were kind of on hold, waiting for our stay home, stay safe orders to be lifted. But now that things have opened back up, we have a lot of our individual school garden managers going back out into their gardens. And basically, we decided that we wanted to grow produce to support food insecure students and their families. And for our large production gardens at our middle school and high school, this meant a redesign of our planting plans and of our garden layout in an effort to scale up our production. So since we grow in in-ground beds, we decided to have our entire garden tilled up, and we remade those beds so that they and the paths between them were a lot narrower. And that allowed for a doubling of our growing capacity without actually expanding the physical footprint of our gardens. And with kind of spearheading this charge to donate produce to our community, a lot of our elementary schools have also gotten on board. And as we have gotten more and more of our schools committed to this vision, the main thing that we've been puzzling over is the best delivery mechanism for donating produce. So over the summer break, the Burlington School Food Project provides free meals to anyone under the age of 18. And we set up feeding sites in high traffic areas in different neighborhoods throughout the city. And we wondered if we could use these sites as a delivery mechanism, that we could give out produce with breakfast and lunches. Alternatively, we thought we could simply go through Feeding Chittenden, which is our local food bank. In both cases, we'd be getting food to folks in need, but with the former, there's that added benefit of directly supporting our school district families, kind of really focusing on our community within a community. But within the past few weeks, the mayor of Burlington, he created a new initiative called Plant for the People, with the vision of leveraging a lot of community garden know-how in an effort to tackle local food insecurity. And so there's this overarching goal of having folks produce and donate 100,000 pounds of fresh produce to Feeding Chittenden, that food bank that I recently mentioned. And the city is partnering with local greenhouses, nurseries, and seed companies to hand out starts and seed packets. They've created a system that can connect new growers with experienced ones so that gardening knowledge can be shared freely within the community. And just given the magnitude of this initiative, we've decided that we'll be funneling our produce donations through the channels established by this program. And the Burlington School Food Project will be equipping all of our school gardens with scales so that folks can weigh their produce and we can really, really keep track of what we're donating. And, that way at the end of the summer, we can say that the Burlington School District made a commitment to mitigating food insecurity through this Plant for the People initiative. And we contributed, X thousand pounds of food to folks in needs. And that's like our main goal. That is how we have really adjusted. And, we've been very fortunate in that even with schools closed, we've been able to access our greenhouse and our gardens. We didn't have to pull teeth. We didn't have to craft convincing arguments to pitch to administrators to be allowed to use our gardens. Whereas, I know that a lot of other folks are struggling with that. And so what we've done and what we plan to do with our school gardens, that might look like really different from the reality that you're experiencing. But, we've just mainly been focusing on, since we have our access to our gardens, making sure that when folks are coming in, that they are staying safe, that they are adhering to kind of like standard operating procedures. And we've pulled those from a local community garden network. They released a really, really in-depth document with recommendations for kind of garden volunteer safety. And so we're making sure that all of our schools have that document posted in any sort of like centralized meeting site near a garden, and that any individual who's interested in volunteering also has access to that document, that it's sent to them beforehand. So those are kind of all the ways that we have adjusted. And I'd say it's been pretty successful. It's actually been a relatively smooth transition. So yeah, that's that.
Thank you, Christine. I was trying to, listening to you and having listened to Josh and also to Marie, kind of trying to look for some of these common threads. And it sounds like the safety and hygiene plans, there's already, I know all of you have a keen focus on food safety, in your everyday operations. But those safety plans have been critical in both confidence, but in also, being safe and getting the work done. And then also this pivot, towards a more production orientation, and then also supporting families at home, either through seed distribution, seedling distribution, and or direct food distribution. And so, it's interesting, in different places with different organizations, some of the pivots have been similar. But I'd love to be able to hear from Lyndsey Waugh now. Welcome to Food Systems Friday, and I'll hand the mic over to you while I work on getting my screen to share so that I can share your slides.
Thank you. What I would just say, Robin, most of what's in my slides, I think, has been really beautifully articulated by the folks that have come before me and shared some knowledge of their experiences. And I think the way that you transitioned, talking about what we're seeing across multiple communities and areas, there's common and similar activities. And then there's also some organizations I think that have done a really wonderful job with what I think we've all referred to it now as the pivot. We're calling it the green pivot. It's been pretty incredible to witness. So I'm gonna just take a quick moment to introduce our foundation and share about what we do to create some context. And then I'll quickly go through the slides that we have, since much of this information, again, our previous partners did a great job speaking to. And then I'm also going to add something in that isn't necessarily noted on my slides, but I do want to address a funder's perspective and maybe a couple tips for organizations as you're thinking about how you talk about your pivot with your funding partners. So for those of you that I haven't met, my name is Lyndsey Waugh, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Sprouts Healthy Communities Foundation. So we are the foundation arm attached to Sprouts Farmers Market, which is a natural and organic grocery store. We are about 340 stores across 23 states. And I have the pleasure of working on behalf of our team to touch organizations that support school and community gardens, nutrition education, nutrition access. So some of my perspective as I share isn't only going to be in the space of food access, but also looking at our nonprofit partners that are really looking at how they address issues of continuing to provide maybe after school programming or obesity intervention programming, all the different places that nonprofits are really meeting families and meeting communities where they're at to provide support. So I'll touch on that as well. So if you want to advance to the next slide, I'll again kind of quickly work through some of these points. So I think what I would say, just to kind of frame it in a personal story, our foundation, really like all companies and groups right now, didn't quite know what was going to happen over the last 90 days. And so like each of you, we were experiencing our own pivot in terms of our grant programming and all the things that we kind of had a bow around for what 2020 was going to look like. And like all of you, as COVID kind of hit our communities and we had to take that sharp left turn, what we quickly began doing was looking out to our network of more than 150 organizations across the country and saying, number one, triaging, what was the reality of programming? And then two, asking the question of ourselves, how can we be most helpful? And so, the things that you're seeing up on the screen in terms of what's changed. So again, we surveyed about 150 or so organizations in our network. So the idea of taking program virtual, having limited access to those school garden spaces, those are things that we've already talked about quite a bit on this call. And then also looking at how the strength of our school garden or nonprofit partners could be adapted to address the needs of food access in communities. And I think that's been something that we saw on the immediate front, but I think also as a trend moving into the future, what we saw as COVID hit, and I can say this, having a strong connection into the grocery and kind of food access retail side of business, is our system was strained. And food banks, our ability as a retailer to, when you're selling out a product in the store, you don't have that same amount that you're able to supply out to our food bank system. And so for the organizations that are on this call that have stepped in and stepped forward to look at how you can play a role in sourcing food, in addressing food inequity, in increasing capacity for gardens to provide that food access point, I just want to tip my hat to you and say thank you, because we're not out of the woods. This is going to be a real issue, not only through you know, this summer and into the school year. But I think what we've all seen is that there's some real disparities in the system, and it's going to take that, I think, collaboration and innovation from all of us, you know, working together in spaces like this to create more resiliency moving forward. So I'll take the next slide. Thanks. So again, a lot of this you're all experiencing firsthand and in real time. How do you go back to school in the fall? What does that look like? How do the investments that you've made in training and volunteers and plants and planting and, you know, curriculum planning, how does all of that continue to have value, and that those investments that you made continue to be of benefit? And what I would say is, it's been really exciting. We're very involved in an organization that many of you may already be familiar with, which is the School Garden Support Organization Network. So that's kind of a collaborative group that our foundation, Whole Kids Foundation, many nonprofits perhaps on this call are connected into. But what we made an investment in as a foundation was the creation of some COVID and now some equity, and how you talk about equity in the space of school and community gardens, but in resources in terms of webinars, a blog, peer-to-peer learning opportunities, and you're going to continue to see more of that through the SGSO network. So I'd say sgsonetwork.org is the website where you can find some great resources to enhance what you all are doing. I'm going to touch on three great examples that I've seen of organizations that took that pivot and really maximized the benefit for their organizations. Those are on my next slide. So many of you may be familiar with these organizations already. Denver Urban Gardens, Outteach, which was formerly Real School Gardens, and then Living Classrooms in Baltimore. And so I called out these three examples because we've had a unique position, because we touch so many different organizations and communities, to see what types of similar ideas were coming from multiple voices in this work, and maybe some of those organizations that we feel did a really nice job with execution. So Denver Urban Gardens traditionally has an annual plant sale that serves as one of their primary fundraising events. And they took adapted the bones of that program to add in a resiliency garden initiative, where they were able to distribute 1,000 grow kits across Metro Denver using a coalition of multiple partners to make those boxes available to families. So they weren't just talking about the kind of immediate shock of what's happening, but really starting to prep the community to say, we don't have food access and food resiliency handled, so how do we start to bring that to community and empower individual families through this work? But what I really loved about that program is they were able to have a fundraising component to continue to support their staffing needs as an organization. They took their strength of knowing how to, prep and build out these garden boxes, and then they were able to activate a coalition. And I think, I think it was Josh who mentioned earlier this idea of coalition building. Even the call, Robin, that your team is organizing right now, this is something that as a funder is not only exciting, but as somebody who's also super excited about kind of the future and where we're going, because organizations are being required to let down their guard, lean in, be uncomfortable, experience that pivot and say, we offer a component here that can be really beneficial, and how do we partner with maybe school food or another nonprofit in a way we wouldn't have previously been able to do. And so that to me is exciting because the outcomes that we're seeing and the intentionality behind this work is really going to live on and move the needle for all of us. Outteach, I'll just briefly touch on that, and then living classrooms. But Outteach took Teacher Appreciation Day and turned it into #EducationIsOpen, which began as a online kind of reality of talking about the disparity between kids that have access to the resources for virtual learning at home and those that don't. So they took it and turned what's happening now into a mission communication opportunity. And then they also tied in a grassroots fundraising, kind of open source fundraising component into the program. And then Living Classrooms, if you're not familiar with this organization, they work in inner Baltimore and do some really powerful work around multi-generational community building, right? And how you have to touch each level of a family and a community in order to make real change. And they took their youth farm stand, which again is traditionally kind of one of their annual gatherings, and pivoted to make it a customer, still offering their youth farm stand, but instead of having the kids out working the event, they did kind of a drive-through distribution to still have the components of their program take place, but to also educate the community about the need for their work long-term. So as I sit here and kind of think about what I could offer that would be most helpful right now, I would say, as a funder, I'm just so moved by the resiliency, the not giving up, the heart, I think that all of you have brought to this work. And I would encourage you, as you're looking out to funders that you work with, it's not about having it all handled right now. It's about, I think, having conversations to say, you know, the way we can work together is bigger than a check. And, you know, writing that check or making a donation, it's also saying, you know, what are you seeing, you know, as a funder, where do you see opportunities? You know, if there's a gap that you're experiencing, if you have funding that's towards a program that needs to be adapted, ask for what you need. You know, ask funders to unrestrict funding to save jobs. Ask them to be more flexible with the types of grants that they're working on. Ask for in-kind, share your story. Because I find that for us, what's greatest is when the community is really telling us where we can be most helpful in this work. And I can share that for the other funders that I work with, they would echo those sentiments. And just say, you know, we're ultimately here to cheer for you, to, you know, help you continue to cut this new path. So ask of us and tell us where we can be most beneficial. So I'm happy to take any questions, or I don't know if I went long. I'm gonna pause and maybe Robin, you can guide me if there's anything else you want me to speak to.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that was very, very helpful information for the folks who are in the audience also, because we have really some amazing representatives from organizations across the United States. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the participants list and keep track during the chat. So thank you so much. Some of our participants, of course, needed to leave at the top of the hour, but all of our panelists have committed to being here until 1:15 to make sure that all of our questions are addressed. And so I am the question asker, but many of you have been doing a great job. Thank you so much, Josh, Marie, and Christine, for keeping your eye on the chat and addressing some of the questions that were coming up. And so one of the questions that folks had were kind of concern about, how do you get the produce that, since the pivots have happened from school garden education more into production, then how do you go about getting those foodstuffs to the distribution points so that everything is staying fresh? So perhaps one of you who addressed that question in the chat could take that on quickly, just so that other folks can hear the answers. Maybe I think, yeah, Josh, I'm going to call on you because I saw you addressing part of that.
Yeah, in Colorado, what we are doing is, well, one, checking with the food banks to see how they would like it. A couple of our partners are also really, really skilled at this, and we'll be relying on them. So for example, in Colorado, there's an organization called Fresh Food Connect, and their primary goal is to basically rescue food before it goes anywhere and becomes not fresh, and take it straight to a food bank or a place where it can be utilized by the community. So when we're not using those partners and we're doing it ourselves, what we are doing is we're making sure that we will have a cooler on us, a clean and sanitized one, but we also have a big thing of compostable produce bags. We also have, in each garden, we have salad spinners, we have sanitized scissors and materials to sanitize those scissors. And we've also got these big tub trugs that are in the storage units at each garden we build. And so we're able to utilize those to harvest into as well. And from there, we can kind of give those a rinse and wash them properly, and then put them in those produce bags. And distribute them that way, but we will be distributing the same day as the harvest. So we'll be harvesting different geographic clusters throughout our region on different days. So we won't be traveling very far with those, because wherever we harvest, the closest food bank is where that food is going to be going on the same day.
Thank you. And then Marie, I just noticed in the chat, you mentioned that there's a different plan for you all associated with the greens, so that's not something that you're distributing.
Yeah, we can't. It's too since we weren't able to plant gardens earlier in the season. There's definitely what normally can grow here has shifted a little bit because of us growing a bit later than really you should start growing crops. So we're only able to plant those crops that do really well in the summer because it's just, so hot here. So it's a lot of tomatoes, watermelon, cucumbers, peppers. We can't really start greens right now. They just won't really make it. So more than likely that food will probably be harvested and then just packaged right away. And we also expect to just distribute it that day. There also is opportunity for us. Our local food bank is working with partners interested in hosting pop-up pantries. So in some communities, we might be working with other partners to organize a day that the food bank would actually bring their mobile pantry to the site. And so the food will be distributed immediately. And there's a lot of, marketing that would go into that. But this is something that the food bank here has been doing and has really ramped up doing since the crisis started. And it's been, they've been able to get into a lot of communities that they normally have struggled to bring food to.
Interesting. One of the questions that came up in the chat also was Christine had mentioned that in Burlington, they have committees comprised of the teachers. Maybe you can speak more specifically to who your members on the committee, but essentially the question was how effective is that? How's that working out for you, Christine?
Yeah, so someone had basically asked what is the kind of in terms of my role as a support organization embedded within the district versus what's the role of the individual school taking, and kind of what is the best kind of relationship between those two things. So each of our elementary schools has a outdoor or school garden committee. There are committees that teachers are required to be on, kind of as part of their contracted hours and to participate in meetings. So, things like equity or planning committees, things like that. And so these schools have created ones specifically oriented around gardens so that teachers can have time during their contracted hours to meet and to plan and discuss initiatives. And it just makes things a lot easier when teachers are getting paid to do work, related to their schools and related to enhancing education, as opposed to having to meet kind of on their own watch and on their own dime. And so that has been incredibly effective in terms of a way to get teachers and parents involved in terms of the maintenance of the gardens. And I basically attend all these monthly meetings and provide planting recommendations and things like that, since I have a lot of gardening knowledge, having worked in production agriculture for a while, as opposed to some teachers don't really necessarily know how much space does a tomato plant need? How much space should we be allocating in each bed for what? So I'm there to provide that sort of guidance and even material support, giving people seeds, giving people starts, providing compost. All those things are acquired through our farm to school budget, run by the Burlington School Food Project. But the teachers and the parents who comprise that committee, they're the ones that are responsible for creating some sort of maintenance or management plan. They're the ones responsible for making sure that the garden is able to survive over the summer, because I'm managing 2 production gardens and don't have the capacity to visit 6 different elementary school sites in the 20 hours a week that I am, that I work for the district, because the other 20 hours I'm working for kids gardening. So it's kind of that push and pull between how much support can we provide that is both hands-on, but then also having people kind of be able to do their thing. Because that's what we want, is we want to have a good support structure, but we also want schools to feel empowered to do work on their own. And, we want schools to be able to function independently if eventually we get to a place where my position may not be needed or something like that, which is if anyone has heard of Food Corps, they're an AmeriCorps program aimed at connecting kids to healthy food. And for Food Corps and for many AmeriCorps programs, that idea is almost to work yourself out of a job, right? You go in, you create systems of support, but then you also want schools to be able to function independently and to be able to have that kind of power and to be able to have the systems in place that they can do everything themselves.
So there was a question that came through asking about how teachers are compensated for, for their time. And I think, Christine, you mentioned one of those ways, right? If it's built into their, service load, it's part of, as opposed to in addition to. But do you have any other comments, or any of the other panelists?
In terms of over the summer, teachers aren't necessarily compensated for their volunteering that they do. That being said, we have a co-op in Burlington that runs a really cool program whereby co-op members can volunteer for community organizations that do food-based or with food-oriented missions. And so an organization such as the Burlington School Food Project, we can sign up as a site where people can volunteer. And then when people volunteer for us, helping to take care of our gardens, we keep track of their hours. We send those hours into the co-op, and then those individuals get discounts on their groceries. So many teachers live in Burlington. Many teachers shop at that co-op. So even though they're not necessarily getting paid for their work over the summer, there is sort of a compensation system. And it's a really great way for us also to pull in volunteers. But when it comes to the school year, they're able to work in kind of garden planning into their contracted, into their teacher contracted hours, which is pretty cool.
Thank you. So it is 1:15, or at least in Arizona, so it's 15 minutes after the hour. And so we we talked all of our panelists into joining us through this time. Through the chat, we were able to share the contact information. And then if you go to our landing page for the Food Systems Fridays, you can find all of the bios. And I invite you to learn more about all of their organizations doing amazing work to support kids and their access to gardens, because we know the literature shows, the research shows that, you know, kids' exposure to gardens increases their preference for vegetables. It actually increases their fruit and vegetable consumption. So not just will I eat it, but actually eating it. And we know that when they have access to the hands-on, that improves the impact. So we know that it actually increases their expectations for what healthy eating is and their expectations for themselves. And the literature also supports and shows us that, you know, it changes the perception that kids have of their parents, actually, you know, at home, that it changes their perceived access to fruit and vegetables and their parents' involvement in their health and wellness. So these are all things that we know are important for long-term food system sustainability and for sustainable diets and a well population. And so I want to thank all of you, Lyndsey, Josh, Marie, Christine, and Laura helped organize this webinar today also. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you to all of those of you who joined us and the amazing and important work that you're doing in the community. So we will be signing off now. It's kind of hard to leave when the conversation is so wonderful, but to the panelists, we invite you to just push the leave button. I know it's such an unceremoniously a way to end it, but I'm so pleased that we get to have this forum and format. We would not have been having this conversation, frankly, if it were not for all these movement restrictions. So there are some small positives that have come out of a very scary negative. So thank you very much, all of you, for your time and your support for this important work.